So in the last few years, we've seen the luxury watch market just skyrocket with prices. And with this, there's been a lot of conversation about investment watches to look out for and where can you double your money with watches. And today I just wanted to kind of discuss this topic. A lot of this has been brought on by other videos I've seen discussing this, as well as one video in particular released by Kevin O'Leary. He's the guy in Shark Tank worth $400 million talking about investment watch pieces. I want to kind of address this idea, this overarching idea about watches and why I think they're personally not a good investment. Okay, so throughout this, I'm going to reference that Kevin O'Leary video. I actually reached out to them to have a conversation about this particular topic. It sounds like they'd be open to actually coming on the channel. So if you want to maybe see that happen, I definitely recommend going over to his channel, leave some comments, say I just sent you there. I think that would be a good way to get on his radar. But a lot of points in there, actually the watches that he mentions in that video, I don't necessarily disagree with. And there's other points I don't necessarily disagree with. But I do think the overarching idea about watches as investments, I don't know how good of an idea that is. And I know when you're talking about where to put your money, someone like myself saying things about it, of course people are going to have their own opinions and maybe don't like how I'm assessing this. But your money, you can do whatever you want with it, but here's just my take. So first off, I don't think you can necessarily say that you can't make money with watches. We've looked and seen time and time again that you can actually make money on watches if you do flip them, and it has happened in many cases. You can look in short memory, looking back at last year with the release of the new GMT on the Jubilee from the Pepsi GMT, just seeing how that now is trading at nearly double the price on the secondary market compared to the MSRP price. You can see that very true as well with the 5700 series with the Nautiluses, as well doubling in price and finding many of them just way over retail. And then if you get into vintage, that's a whole nother animal. You can looking at vintage Rolex Daytonas just in general, just going up in price, as well as Paul Newman Daytonas. We know the actual Paul Newman Daytona worn by Paul Newman just went up for $17 million and sold at that price. So there's certainly money to be had, even with brands like Tag Heuer, with a lot of the vintage Octavias, with prices going up quite a bit. So even niche-oriented brands in the vintage market, you can make money. But let's look at 6 reasons why I think watches are bad investments. And the first point is limited amount of watches that actually retain their value first, and of course even smaller amounts increase in value. So most of us that have knowledge of the market of watches know that there are just a few brands that stand out in terms of really holding their value. And for me, the first that come to mind are Rolex, of course, Rolex Steel Sports particularly, because there are models from Rolex that don't necessarily hold their value as well. You can look at the Cellini, for example, and even some Datejust that are maybe in 36 millimeters don't hold their value as much, as well as Patek Philippe, being probably the 2 that come up the most in terms of holding their value, retaining value, and even increasing in value. But looking at the entire landscape, you realize that most watches, luxury watches, are rather soft on the market, maybe outside of those, and maybe a few limited edition models from different brands like Omega. We saw the Snoopy editions kind of going up quite a bit, Speedy Tuesday editions going up as well. So in addition to the limited amount of watches where you can actually go ahead and retain value or increase in value, we also have to think about this supply and demand idea and why these watches are so sought after. It's because they're very hard to get. You only get these type of returns on pieces if you were able to develop a good relationship with an AD, an authorized dealer, which often comes after developing some trust and purchase a few watches prior. And although anecdotal, I've heard many authorized dealers being hesitant to sell one of their watches at MSRP for somebody that's just gonna be flipping it, trying to get a nice return immediately. So with this majority of watches that tend to be rather soft on the secondary market, it also leads to the difficulty in never experiencing that supposed payoff while the hype is there. In fact, many of the biggest returns tend to come from select vintage timepieces like I mentioned. However, that brings us to our next point. And this is fake watches and fake hype. So with the rise of the internet and social media, we've seen an echo chamber of hype being created by collectors, dealers, and enthusiasts about particular models. Whether it is the vintage or contemporary models, much of the demand and price increases stems from the lack of supply. When this is the case, many dealers, enthusiasts, and owners of these watches tend to be a little bit incentivized, especially if they have ownership or have some skin in the game in terms of owning these watches to sell, to hype these things up. And with the limited amount of supply that is out there for many of these pieces, or the long wait lists that go along with many of these contemporary pieces and being able to get your hands on them, just a few listings can totally tilt this secondary market and allow the hype to really take over and inflate a lot of these prices here. In addition, it also creates a really desire for more people to want these watches when there's not enough supply, which then has people come in and start creating fakes. Fakes that have been even harder to identify, especially over places like the internet, in just a few simple pictures. And people are sometimes willing to take that risk, and people end up getting burned. You see it very frequently, especially in the vintage landscape. So just another reason here. Point number 3, why watches are bad investment, is the ability to actually get the payout. One thing that I think is so overlooked in watches, and you hear about it very frequently, is, all right, yeah, you get, buy it for this amount, you can sell it for this amount. That second part of the idea, selling the watch, is a little bit more difficult than what people initially think about, unless they have a structure in place to actually go ahead and make that sale. For one, in Kevin O'Leary's video, what he constantly refers to throughout is the prices on Chrono 24. And in my video where I talked about how to sell a watch online, I'll link to it in the description down below if you want to watch it, talk about the kind of deceiving nature of listed price versus auctions that have recently sold, or products that have recently sold, and actually seeing the true value price. A lot of those listings are going to be inflated and are kind of just testing the waters for one. In addition, if you're somebody who's going to be selling independently through a place like Chrono 24 or eBay, you have 3 ways to go about selling a watch. Let's just say this. You either can sell independently through your site, which then you're going to probably have to develop your own traffic, a way of getting traffic for people to actually see that listing. Second, you have the ability to sell through these third-party sites like an eBay or Chrono 24, which of course you're going to get the increased traffic because people are on here navigating, finding and looking for listings all the time, but you are going to get the fees that are associated. So much of that payoff that you're expecting is going to be eaten away by those fees by that provider that's going to allow you to list on their site. And the final way you can go ahead and sell your watch is through a dealer, which of course they are going to eat into your profits and maybe all of your profits, just like that Chrono 24 listing or eBay listing. So overall, it's not as easy said as done. In many of the cases when you buy a watch, especially if you're an independent seller, don't have a track record and trust related, people are going to be very hesitant to buy from you. So that return that you're talking about here is not nearly going to be as big as what you anticipate. Point number 4, watches will be the first thing to take a hit. So let's be honest here. Watches are luxury goods. Sure, they do serve a function to tell time, but the idea of tracking time has really been commoditized with the rise of quartz watches, of course, and smartwatches, which are, of course, exploding in the modern public. Fortunately for us all, the economy has been very solid as of late, which is always good, and I assume lends to the great rise in prices in luxury watches. And this bubble that many people are alluding to, we always hear about, is it going to burst, is it going to burst, has really allowed this all to happen. However, if we can learn anything from history here, we know that for every peak in the financial market, there's always a recession that follows. And in these periods, there's usually places that take the biggest hit first, and that is in luxury goods. Anything that is going to be excess in your life in times where people aren't prepared, they are going to be the first things to go. So luxury watches, whenever hard times come, these are going to depreciate in value much quicker than many other assets that you have. In addition, these are also the slowest places to recover following a recession. So, and honestly, if you want to look at it from an investor perspective, I'd hold out on buying any watch until the recession hits and capitalize on people listing their watches following that period. And you probably could then end up getting these returns that you're talking about. Point number 5, why watches are bad investments, is they're just simply better places to invest your money. So again, I am no financial advisor, so I always recommend talking to professionals about what to do with your money, and maybe finding a mentor who has accumulated wealth that you can trust and can help you along your way in building it for yourself. However, I do know enough to say that every great investment portfolio is rooted in diversification. In the case of Kevin O'Leary, the guy's worth $400 million. So many of the things that he's going to say are going to be maybe practical to him, but maybe not as practical to most of us that are watching. They don't nearly have as much wealth as him. In his case, I can actually see watches being a decent place to invest. However, I can guarantee that it is one of many areas that he has his money. As an active investor, many of what can be seen on the show Shark Tank, he's a man who's also a serial entrepreneur, and I'm sure has a diversified portfolio of mutual funds, stocks, angel investments, real estate, and many other forms that will equal or maybe have less risk associated with watches and might have even higher potential payoffs. So in other words, watches become much more viable as an investment once these other channels are addressed. And if you have excessive wealth where risk is minimized, or if you're somebody ready to make trading and dealing with watches a full-time pursuit, then you might be able to consider watches as an investment. Otherwise, it might be hard to justify investing in watches, especially when entry-level points in investing in watches usually start around $10,000 for the ones that are really coveted. And now for this final point, I think it is both, logical from my perspective, but also a little bit maybe romantic and just my overall thought about watches. And I think looking at them as investments ends up taking away from the biggest asset I think watches are, which is the ability to enjoy them. Watches to me walk that fine line of art, self-expression, and craftsmanship in measuring the most valuable asset of our time. What makes them so compelling for me is their ability to be things that can retain and increase in value while you enjoy them, unlike a car that when you drive off the lot takes a massive hit. This is a point that Kevin actually brings up in his video, which I totally agree with. Yet with collectors demanding perfection and mint condition pieces, it can often call for those purchasing watches with the intention of selling them to miss out on the most amazing opportunity and aspect of them being purchased in the first place. Because at the core, watches are not meant to be stored away, but to be worn and experience the world with you. In short, I think it can be summed up by just saying this. The ROI of a watch is what it means to you, not what it means to the market. All right, guys, so I think the comment section for this video might be fun, so please leave comments down below. Those are my opinions. I'd love to hear yours as well. And if you appreciate this conversation I'm trying to start up here, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Also, leave some comments over at Kevin O'Leary's video. Might be able to get him on the show. That could be a lot of fun. Also, guys, if you want to be like Kevin with those red bands, you can get a great looking watch strap for your watch at teddybaldassarre.com as well. And then finally, if you want to join our watch giveaway, fill out that watch giveaway form and then follow me on Instagram. In addition, go to bobswatches.com if you want to get an iconic timepiece. A lot of these watches we're talking about maybe being investment pieces. I don't know if I necessarily agree again, but if you want to get one that will retain its value, be timeless over time, that you can enjoy on your wrist, no better place than Bob's Watches. And using that link allows you to get a watch that you love and support the channel. So guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I'll see you all very soon.